With us is our friend Dr. Justin A. Frank, MD, the psychoanalyst, clinical professor at the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Science at George Washington University, the author of numerous on-the-couch books, Trump on the Couch, Obama on the Couch, Bush on the Couch. Justin Frank, MD is his Twitter handle, and he's got quite a lively Twitter feed. He's genuinely worth following. Justin Frank, MD, spelled just like it sounds. Dr. Frank, welcome back to the program. I'm curious your thoughts on kind of two categories of stuff. One is if Trump is indicted, how will he react? And the second is if Trump is indicted, how will his followers react?
Well, as you know already, that which is what I know, is that psychoanalysts can't predict the future any better than anybody else can, although we can have some idea based on our awareness of the past. And if the past is prologue, the prologue is that Trump is a narcissistic psychopath who cannot ever admit guilt or accept criticism. And when he is cornered, he is the kind of person who is written, even if somebody hits him, he'll hit back 10 times harder. So that's what he does. And I think that the question then that you're talking about is what will Trump do if he's indicted? My first thought is that we might have to do things backwards. And I can't imagine Merrick Garland doing things backwards. But it's like incarcerate first and indict later, almost, because this is a man who, to paraphrase Hillary Clinton, when she said it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a village to face a psychopath, because we need a whole group of people to confront him. It's the equivalent of doing an intervention for alcoholics, that it requires a whole group of people confronting them. But alcoholics usually have a conscience, which is partly why they drink, whereas Trump doesn't have a conscience. And psychopaths who are narcissistic only can blame others. They're never responsible for anything, and therefore they'll never admit to anything. But in terms of how he would react, he needs to be incarcerated so he can't react in the way that he might react. At least they took away all those top secrets from him, but who knows where they've been already, since they've been in Mar-a-Lago for a long time. But he reacts by being violent and attacking. He reminds me of the stories about coyotes who will gnaw off, if their paw is trapped in a trap, they'll gnaw their leg off, the paw, to be able to escape. I mean, he's that kind of a person. Mm-hmm. So that's the first answer. So he needs to be incarcerated immediately. If you're going to indict him, you have to surround him with a lot of other people, because the only way you can indict him is to be able to immediately put handcuffs on him. It will not work any other way. The second thing, so that's my prediction about that and how he can respond. People who are endangered will respond with violent reactions, period, which is why so many people have been afraid of him all these years. As for his followers, I think his followers have internalized enough of his behavior and his suggestions and his sense of victimhood that they will probably continue to polarize this country, and they need to also be confronted directly. I don't know if they'll be as organized, because Trump really, as chaotic as he is, was really the organizer in a way of the January 6th insurrection attempt. But I think that there are other people who know how to organize things, and and they could do that. So the followers, you can't just cut off the head and the rest of the body's going to die. That's not the case. Trumpism is here. What's happened is there's a long history of feeling attacked, and that you're not allowed to speak up, and that many people have felt that. And what Trump did was, in 2016, he showed what other people took as courage. He said, I don't believe in political correctness. I am going to say what I think, and you can't stop me. So a lot of people saw that as courage. But in my view, it's not courage of his convictions. It's the courage of his psychopathy. And that was his courage. And he was comfortable expressing it. And now we have people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and all these members of Congress and various other people who don't have any brakes on what they say. They have the courage of expressing their crazy ideas.
So
and they're dangerous if they get organized.
I understand.
Sorry.
It's brilliant, and I always learn something talking with you. I completely understand your argument that before Trump is indicted, he needs to be locked up so that he can't respond to the indictment in a way that would produce more stochastic terrorism and other problems. But how practically do you do that? Are you suggesting like a psychiatric seizure of him, or are you just speaking in the abstract?
I actually would love to have a psychiatric seizure of him. There has to be a group of people or one person who's willing to have some kind. He has to be forced into it, but have some direct contact with him, and then call the police and to say that he's a danger to society. And then he has to be locked up. I mean, that's the fact. Wow. I'm happy to be the psychiatrist to do it. If somebody wants to have some armed guards around me, I'm ready to do it.
Okay.
It's really scary.
Yeah, it really is.
He's a scary person.
And
I mean, people used to be afraid of his tweets.
Yeah. Can you speak to stochastic terrorism, this concept that a leader or an influencer, an influential person can essentially say, will no one rid me of this meddlesome priest, and some random person that you never had heard of before steps into the breach and says, I'll do it. In this case, the guy in the Cincinnati FBI field office, or the guy who showed up at the Capitol building yesterday and tried to have a shootout and ultimately committed suicide. To what extent do you think that Trump is intentionally trying to trigger stochastic terrorism, and what kind of a threat does it really represent to our country?
First of all, I think, yes, he's intentionally trying to trigger it. He's been triggering it when he would say lock her up. He's been triggering it when he said, if you beat somebody up in his rallies, I'll pay the bill. He has triggered it from the time he ran for president. Right. So, yes, he's triggering it. Now, the next thing is, how does a person have the power to be able to trigger that kind of terrorism? And I think that it's partly being like a mafia boss, but in this case, it's also that when you're a leader like him, what you do is you can mold people's superegos. You can mold their conscience in such a way as to free them from the chains of having to control themselves in society. You can free them from having to be social and socialized. You can free them from the things that we learned when we were 5 years old, when we learned the Ten Commandments. A president can free them from those built in eventually.
And he's doing that by example, right?
And he does it by example, and then all it takes is one or two people with a gun and with an AR-47 or whatever they have them to do things like that, and it will continue because it is actually a disinhibition of the superego. It's a disinhibition of the conscience. And most people don't do that except when they're watching a boxing match or a, kill the umpire kind of thing. Right. But they're not going to kill the umpire.
Right. No, it's rhetorical. So setting aside for a moment the possibility of actually incarcerating Donald Trump, which, whether it's psychiatrically or legally, I don't think is going to happen any day soon. If you were advising President Biden or the media, here we are. I mean, I'm part of the media. What is the message that should be directed to Americans in general, and Trump humpers and Trump supporters in particular, that might take some of the power out of his rhetoric and his control over them?
It's very hard to convince. It's very hard to present facts to people who are convinced. So it's very hard for anybody to start telling people who love Trump not to love him. It's really hard to do that. And the only way to do that, in my experience, is to do what's called allying yourself with their narcissism. In other words, allying yourself with what they're proud of in themselves and what they feel good about. And only then can you start to present how Trump really hates them and how destructive he is.
For example, we have about a minute to a hard break here. Can you give me a sample dialogue of how that would happen?
Have any of you been to Mar-a-Lago? And how have you been received when you were there? What's it like to have people wait on you and bring you caviar? What's it like to be welcomed into the bosom of our president? You won't be. You can't be. All he wants is to use you and get you to express his rage and hatred. And he's giving you permission and support. But other than that, there's no way you're ever going to go to Mar-a-Lago and ever be invited.
He wants your money, but the only way you're ever going to get into Mar-a-Lago is with a $200,000 check.
Well, that's true. But the other thing he wants is he wants your violence.
Right.
And that's what's harder to accept.
Right. That's.
He wants to get you comfortable being violent.
And then once you're violent, you go to jail and he doesn't.
That's exactly right. He didn't. Actually, I didn't tell you to kill an FBI agent. I just told you where they are and who they are.
Right. Yeah. Which is exactly what he's up to.
Plausible deniability.
There you go.
Great narcissist.
Dr. Justin Frank, one of the great psychoanalysts and psychiatrists of our time. He's a psychoanalyst and clinical professor at the Department of Psychiatry at George Washington University, the author of Trump on the Couch and Obama on the Couch and Bush on the Couch. Justin Frank, MD is his Twitter handle. Check it out. Dr. Frank, thank you again so much.